I'd like to hand it over to Nathalie Hanzlik-Meech, who is a 10th grade student at the American School in Dubai, and Laurence Myers, the service learning coordinator there, who I've been lucky enough to work with at Compass for, I want to say 7 years now of wonderful time working with educators and students. So Laurence, over to you.
Well, Gitanjali, it is an absolute pleasure to be here, and it's so nice to see, first of all, a great combination of faces that honestly I didn't expect, but was really nice to see people that I know, and also, of course, all the new people who are here that hopefully we can make some connections with and kind of broaden our base and our understanding together. So today's kind of focus is on the iceberg. And Natalie, I wanted to give her just a second to kind of introduce herself a little bit too. But before we do that, I just want to say a big thank you to her, because it was a little bit of a last minute pull in and marketing strategy on my side, because she's relatively new at this. And so I really admire and appreciate the time that she's putting into obviously sharing, but also trying it out and learning along the way. And so anything that we go through today will be very much experimental, and we're always trying to do things a little bit better and use the iceberg in different ways. So Natalie, I'm going to go to the presentation if you don't mind, or do you want to introduce yourself first? Maybe why don't you take a second to do that?
Sure. Well, hello, my name is Natalie, and like Gitanjali said, I am a 10th grade student at the American School of Dubai. And well, thank you very much, Mr. Myers, for that little introduction, but also thank you to you all, because thank you for the Compass educators for just really creating this opportunity, because it's a really amazing opportunity that I'm a part of now. So yes, when Mr. Myers shares his screen, I can just quickly, and I realize that a lot of you are familiar with the iceberg model, but it's always good to sort of go through it again. And also for those of you who aren't so familiar, I will just quickly run through one example that I always sort of use is the beach cleanup model. So at least in Dubai or in the United Arab Emirates, there are a lot of beaches, right? And on those beaches, there's a lot of garbage. So taking that sort of the whole iceberg model to really use that as a framework to really analyze that issue of there being a lot of garbage on the beach and what actions people could possibly take. So first of all, at the event level, you've got the garbage on the beach, and maybe you go to the beach and you see that garbage and you think, okay, I'm going to do a beach cleanup, and you organize a group of your friends and you go and you clean up the beach. And that's sort of a one-off event. It's more of a reaction to what you see at the surface level, and it's maybe a one-off event, and it's cleaned the beach up, but it's not really solved the issue by any means. So then you move a little deeper and you think, maybe you come back the next day and you see that more garbage is there. And so then you maybe organize weekly beach cleanups. And through those weekly beach cleanups, you really begin to see patterns of behavior and different trends that are happening over time. And you can begin to anticipate that the behavior will continue. And just weekly beach cleanups or daily beach cleanups aren't exactly going to solve the problem at that level either. So then you move even deeper and you can begin to think, okay, well, what are the actual structures, the system structures in place that lead to that behavior, that lead to that event of there being so much garbage on the beach? And then you can realize, okay, well, maybe there's a sort of, what are the laws, what are the regulations put in place in the UAE that, or maybe the lack of laws that allow all this garbage to just build up on the beach. And so now you're really analyzing the actual structure of what's happening with that garbage on the beach. And you can go even deeper onto the actual mental model. And then you can begin to think, okay, well, why are there a lack of regulations? Why are there a lack of fines for people to just throw garbage on the beach? And then you're really at the what values and assumptions shape this system. So what is it in the UAE that allows for this lack of these policies in place? So maybe this level you're thinking, okay, are people starting to sort of value the convenience over, the sustainable, the environment? And so now, as opposed to just doing that one beach cleanup at the beginning, you're really you're really increasing that impact, because you've now analyzed the situation, you've analyzed the problem so far as to understand the actual values and assumptions in place in the actual country. And from that point, you can start to analyze what should be done in terms of increasing the most impacts, and in terms of actually achieving that goal of taking that garbage off of the beach. Yes.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'm not on mute, right? So you can hear me still? Okay, so I guess I wanted to focus a little bit on the different ways that somebody can use the iceberg. The way that Natalie just described is what I kind of think of as the top-down way, right? So you start with the idea of the event, and you use that event as a scene occurrence to then analyze down as deeply as what Natalie just talked about. So you're really talking about mental models and things once you get very far down at the bottom. The other way to do it, which for me is a great opportunity to kind of plug into student organizations. We also do this at the classroom level, but since this specific example has to do with student organizations, we at the American School of Dubai have about 32, 33 high school organizations, and each one is typically asked to make a connection to the Sustainable Development Goals and try to make a connection, obviously, to the larger picture. And the other thing they're asked to do is create a mission statement by which they will kind of guide what they do. And so the conversations we typically have is this bottom-up approach. So usually what this would entail, either by myself or someone else who is working kind of on my behalf, maybe Natalie can become my new right-hand girl here as we move forward. The idea is that a lot of the mission statements are typically statements that lie at the bottom two levels. So either at the structure systems level or at the mental model level. And so if you ask students what it is they want to accomplish, they will often talk about, you know, we want to change the entire behavior of our community, or we want to solve, you know, this community's problem or the world's issues with environment or social issues and social justice and all those kind of things, which is great. And that's really a good direction to be moving into. So the purpose and the direction is in the right place. But then the next question typically is, can you give us an example or multiple examples about the types of things that this organization would do in a typical year? And so usually it's a brainstorming session, or kids will kind of debrief if this is, let's say, on a whiteboard or something like that, and they'll throw ideas about what they do. And what they do is then kind of put into a little bit of a thinking kind of context so that everything can be visually seen. And then the question that typically I ask of the kids would be, okay, where would you put these things? So what are the things that you do as an organization? And as an organization, where are you putting most of your effort? And what typically happens, this isn't always the case, but will typically happen, is an organization will usually have its mission statement, as it should, right down at the bottom. So either at the mental model or kind of somewhere between the mental model and the systems and structures. But a lot of the things that they're thinking to do are usually at the events level, right? So they'll have a one-off petition, you know, signing, for example, or they'll do some sort of a poster awareness day or something like that. So really, we use the iceberg as a self-analysis tool, so to speak, because what we often find is that disconnect between what the action is, which is usually at the top end of the iceberg, and what the hoped purpose is, which is at the bottom end of the iceberg. So obviously, as a thinking tool and as a visible thinking tool, it's a great opportunity to engage the kids in meaningful conversations about, well, if we want to go here, but this is all we work at, what can we do to change those dynamics, to increase the leverage and see ourselves more as change makers than as an event planner, for example. So that's kind of where we live, so to speak, in the work that we do with student organizations. This you may have seen if you're in our kind of Compass online courses. Of course, this is typically what something might look like in an iceberg situation, usually with small groups of children. And the way that I do it with student organizations, I'm either working with a larger crew of, let's say, the entire membership of a student organization, or sometimes we do kind of deep dives with only the leadership team, which is in our specific case, usually a group of 5. And so what we do is we kind of work with those groups and have similar conversations to what I described. But increasingly, we're finding ourselves going online and trying to figure out what this would look like in an online setting. And so this particular one isn't actually from a student organization conversation, it's from a parent. We have a sustainability committee at the parent level. So this comes from that. And basically it's the same kind of conversation about where would you place things and what should things look like in the context of our school. And then increasingly, there are opportunities for students to run things. So you'll notice Natalie's pictures down at the bottom. She's very pensive, deeply thinking. This specific one is related to an eco-schools organization that we have. And I'll pass this over to Natalie in just a second. And this was done as a facilitation of a multi-stakeholder group within our community, but in a situation where we can't meet face-to-face anymore, which is our reality currently. And then also, just as an extension, we have collaborative opportunities right now that we're engaging in with multiple schools. This particular meeting that I'm showing you the visual of today was just this morning, in fact, and it includes the American School of Dubai and also the GEMS Founder School, also here in Dubai, and the American Community School of Abu Dhabi. And they've created something called the UAE Changemakers Collaborative, which is now starting to link up to other schools in Asia in particular. So it's kind of a new concept. But you'll notice, of course, that the iceberg is figuring prominently there as well. So I'm going to shut down my little presentation, and I'd like to hand it over maybe to Natalie to go a little bit deeper in what your experience is with regard to the iceberg and how you've used it with the Eco Schools program in particular as an example. It's
Sure.
all you.
Okay, well, yes, as Mr. Myers said, I am part of the Eco Schools group, which I'm not sure if many of you guys sort of know what that is, but that's it's an international group that that really gives students what would you say? It's a group, a facilitator group. So it's not in terms of an actual club, it's more of a group that facilitates the whole school in terms of sustainable actions and things. So at the sort of the ASD, the American School Dubai group, we have an advisory board, which, as Mr. Myers also said, it consists of lots of different students from all sorts of grades and also lots of teachers from all across the school. And we have an advisory board meeting 3 times a year. So on the most recent advisory board meeting, Mr. Myers sort of came up with the idea of that we use the iceberg model to really as a framework to generate discussion and also to really to deepen our discussions and analyze our actions. So like Mr. Myers showed with the stickies on the PTSA meet, I first introduced the iceberg model, and then I talked about how we would use that in the advisory board meeting. And what I really found beneficial about using that iceberg model was three things were really clear. One, it provided a really clear and visual idea for people to see where their goals were at, for people to really see what level, what impact they were getting out of in terms of where their goals were. And the second thing that I thought was really, really impactful was that it also, because it was clearly laid out, because it was visually really easy to understand, other groups actually in the call began to see and come up with creative solutions for the other groups and how to move them down. And I remember this one group was talking about how they were having some sort of jumble sale, and this other group had an idea, you can do it like this, maybe make it a weekly jumble sale or something like that, and then that would move it down. And so it was this really, really good collaboration that was happening, all because people could visually see where their goals were at and what they needed to do to increase the impact and move it down. And the third really beneficial thing that I thought came out of using that iceberg model was that since a lot of those people actually hadn't heard of the iceberg model before, it really provided them with a tool, in their kit that they could take anywhere in terms of, they maybe move to a different school or they set up a different organization, but they really got that clear and solid understanding of what the iceberg model was. And that sort of jumps, what leads me to my next point of, because I sort of had that background in explaining it and facilitating it, I brought it up to, like Mr. Myers said, the UAE Changemakers group. And now that group has an introduction with what the iceberg model is. And I think also, Mr. Myers, one of your favorite sort of terms is the cross-pollinating sort of idea. And I think that the iceberg really is a good framework for that, because by spreading that solid understanding, people can, bring that to other groups and share that to other groups. But also it really, like I said before, it just generates that discussion, that analysis of where people's actions are. And because ultimately, most groups want to create the most impact. And so, really understanding that the ways they can do that and where their actions are now, that's what I found the most beneficial by using the iceberg model. Yeah.
Thank you, Natalie. That was great. I think at this point, really, we were hoping to invite a very casual back and forth. Any thoughts, any questions, any ideas maybe that have popped out, or any connections that anyone here makes, and really along the lines of that cross-pollination that Natalie was just talking about. I think for me, it would be important, obviously, to know, the why of why everyone has shown up here. There's obviously something that's brought you here, and so we would like to address any whys, so that we can kind of do what we can do and share our experiences, and of course maybe extend your own context a little bit, possibly too.
You know me, I'm always happy to talk about stuff, but I don't want to be that person.
I was just gonna invite you, Susie. I was just gonna invite you. I'm so happy you're talking.
Well, part of what I work for a social enterprise called Mad Courses, and we've been using the iceberg model in what we call our SDG workshops. We've done a bunch for Mel in ACS Abu Dhabi, and we've been using the iceberg model to get the kids to dig deeper into some of the topics that we address in each workshop. But I love this idea of bottom up. So now I'm just having this brainwave that so we kind of do 2 phases for our courses. And the first one's just the kind of investigate part of the 5 stages. And we do a longer course. And I really want to now tie in, so we dig down this way to think about what are the underlying structures and the mindset. And then in the end, when we start ideating solutions, because when we go to the collaborative action part of our workshops, we get the kids to ideate with the communities or the social entrepreneurs that we have connected them with. But I love this idea of having them sticky note all of their ideas for solutions, and then visualize where on the iceberg they're leveraging. Because I think, I mean, this is like so much thoughts going on in my brain right now, because I do think that what Laurence said is correct, is that we come up with a lot of solutions, but we don't necessarily think about whether we're leveraging from the bottom of the iceberg, or at least the middle, but, medium case scenario. So mind blown. I'm super excited about now designing some of the post-investigation ideation sessions to be the bottom-up iceberg model. So yay, thank you so much, Natalie and Laurence. That was amazingly helpful in a very practical and concrete way.
Yeah, and Suji, thank you first of all for your thoughts. I do find that a lot of times it's really trying to get the kids to reconsider what their role is in the community. And so a lot of times kids do really look at themselves as event planners, and I'm just gonna, I mean, they don't describe it that way, but really that's where they often feel that their expertise or lack of expertise perhaps lies, right? And so it's
Yeah.
really part of a deeper conversation of getting the kids to recognize that, okay, you're not just a member of a community kind of floating around. You have the power to make policy change potentially. So you've got to kind of look at yourself in a deeper and more purposeful way as a member of the school community, rather
Super
than
true.
here I am, I'm a student, education is happening to me. You know what I'm talking about? So it's
Right.
it's a pretty
But
important thing.
also, yeah, to add to that, I feel like when you're an event planner and you do these things that address the event level occurrences, it can be really discouraging and frustrating because, you know, you do a beach cleanup and you go there 2 days later and it's messy again. It can really, really bust your enthusiasm for that sort of activity. Whereas if you're doing, let's say you're creating an education program, like I'm thinking Philippines, because that's kind of where we do a lot of work. If you design an education program that starts being used in the local schools about marine pollution, and you start changing the mindset about disposable packaging with little kids in all of Metro Manila schools, I'm just making stuff up, that will have a longer lasting impact. That will change the mindset and the underlying structures in a way that makes kids more excited to do that thing because it's not so discouraging over time to just see like, oh, that, you know, that place is disgusting again 2 days later. Maybe it takes longer to see your results. That's the that's the part you have to be a little bit more patient for.
Yeah, and I think the dynamic and fairness, I mean, kids are only there for 3, 4 years, right? And so where an adult who might be there for 10 years has the time, the kids are sitting there going, look, you know, by this time next year, I'm not even around. So that's a
Here's
very,
one thing I do consider really great about the this you know, the silver lining to our current situation is that remaining connected to those issues in this day of this kind of Zoom call is easier. So like if you set up a program when you were a 10th grader at AS Dubai, you could now still have a much easier time to check in on that because of this online world that we live in now. So that's a silver lining to what we're facing now, I think.
yeah, thank you, Suji. I'm realizing that Suji and I have totally dominated the conversation here. And I know that Suji doesn't mind me saying this. I owe you a hug, Suji. Is there anyone
I
else?
just muted myself.
Is there anyone else who has any thoughts?
I actually have a question for you, Natalie. You mentioned that the Eco Advisory Board is a range of students. What age ranges do you work with? And do you think it's easy for someone who's younger than you to understand the iceberg, or has it been easier when you're talking to students your own age or older?
Yeah, well, we include really all student leaders, so that would range from mostly middle school to high school, and we haven't got any elementary student leaders who have come, but but I think, yeah, the middle school students, they sure come, and I think with an example, really, to explain it without an example doesn't gauge, that doesn't really engage many people, but to explain it with an example that people understand, then I think that's when people, even seventh graders and things like that, they can really catch on with it too. So yeah, and I think it's really important to have that, again, that whole school view, because places like ASD, they have so many different clubs and different organizations going on that it's so rare to have that opportunity that everyone can just come together and just talk and just see the whole school view, which I think is really, really important.
Totally.
Gitanjali, can I just jump in here just to give it some context? Natalie's in her first year as an eco school executive. And because of COVID, of course, a lot of things don't look like they would typically look. So what Natalie was describing is not 100% of the story. Typically, you would have elementary school kids, and typically you would also have parents and things involved as well. But right now we're a little bit out of kilter as far as the school community goes, and a lot of this work is online, so you lose those kind of informal connections you might have in a hallway, you know, to make a connection with somebody. But what she described is pretty accurate. And the other nice thing for me is that Natalie is a student now, and the Eco Schools group for us is the only group on campus which is a multi-stakeholder. You know, we've got vendors, we've got our security guards, we've got our transport people. Everybody's on there, but it's all 100% student facilitated, which is great. So there's something empowering about Natalie being able to tell our associate superintendent to please sit in this group over here and follow directions.
Yeah, for sure. I didn't realize about that elementary student part because yeah, I joined this actually early last year. So yeah, but that's great. Yeah.
Natalie, I'm interested in what are some of the issues or topics that you're discussing on your advisory board?
Yeah, well, for the Eco Schools Advisory Board, it's mostly to do with sustainability groups at ASD. So like Mr. Myers mentioned before, the groups at ASD are all organized by SDG goals. So mainly the issues that we'd be discussing would pertain really to those goals and to the individuals groups goals, because you know we have lots of different, you know, High Tide works with the beaches, we have these other groups work with elementary students, so they sort of all have their separate goals that they're working towards and their separate issues that they're trying to combat. But with that sort of that iceberg model that we use, we can all, again, we bring that all back into one whole group school sort of discussion. And so yeah, I would say in terms of, it's not really one you know, clear issue that we're discussing. It's really the separate groups would come up with their goals of their separate problems that they see, and then they would put that on the iceberg. So it's a group, but it's separate, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and can you, be more specific of what was one of the issues that, you know, say your elementary students are actually, one of their goals they wanted to tackle?
Oh gosh, I would.
Or you could do it for upper school, one that you know, besides the beaches, yeah.
Besides beaches, I would say, well, I can actually talk about Eco Schools, what Eco Schools is doing, and that would be about the waste in the cafeteria. At least that's not so true this year because there really is no cafeteria this year. Everyone just eats in their classes. But as last year, there was lots and lots of people. Everyone basically sat in the cafeteria, and we had these garbages that people would use, but they really wouldn't use it correctly. And so Eco Schools came up with this design of these new garbage bins that were really clearly labeled of what goes in what bin. And so that whole issue of, you know, tons and tons of food either being wasted or either just not being put into the correct bin was ultimately fixed, even though we haven't had a chance to use those bins yet because that, well, COVID happened. But so that's an example of what an issue we saw, a really big issue with that, all that waste, and a solution that the Eco Schools did.
I used it once in a similar way where we were trying to brainstorm a series of topics and we had a really mixed group, and we were also just trying to get people's, like, parents and admin and stakeholders who don't normally think about these things sort of involved in understanding the kids' projects. And so the kids, we used like a big, it wasn't that big, but an auditorium kind of space with a bunch of white walls. And they sort of worked through like what the challenge was that they were working on. And they started their iceberg and then they stuck them on the walls in these. And so each one was, you know, caring for the animals and trash and plastic straws and things. and then everybody participated. So there was this sort of mad rush of, you know, Post-its and ideas. And so on the right side was all the kids' stuff. And then everybody's else's thoughts were on the left side. So that people could sort of read through, they got like this better idea of what the kids were trying to do. And they could participate by making comments on the left side. And it sort of helped engage these conversations, and then the kids took them down and they were able to sort of talk about it, and the people who were participating could sort of sit with groups that they were intrigued by, and it just created this opportunity for understandings and collaborations, and I think mostly just awareness, right? Like these aren't just kids running around doing things, like they really do care, and there was ways to draw people into what they were doing that that I think it just worked.
And if I can jump on that, Nicole, for just a second, I'm realizing as you're talking that the differences between the adult population and the student population, sometimes actually it's the adults that have the need, I guess, to do the deep analysis in some ways. And a lot of times by asking groups to be involved in using the iceberg to do the analysis that I was describing earlier, it's also a good opportunity for the adults present to be involved in that, because often adults, I think, almost shortchange the kids because their assumptions are that it's okay, you know, a couple posters, that's good enough. And yet you have kids that actually want to do a lot deeper work. If given the chance to do that, and if given the opportunity to kind of get into a groove, so to speak, in terms of moving forward. So I think in some ways the unwritten benefit is that while you're working with the kids, you're also working with the adults at the table in one kind of team. And so that's a double bonus.
Laurence, can I ask a question? I actually have two questions.
Uh-oh. Natalie, you don't know this, but Robert's the like super guru of all this stuff, so you better answer right. Okay, I'm just kidding. Go ahead, Robert.
It just plays off what you just said. It was in my mind anyway, because I'm interested whether the iceberg has been used as a model for deep research, like really like identifying what are the patterns, what are the trends of a certain issue that you identify events. And then from there, actually building system maps to understand like the system structure within a set boundary of the problem, right? And so forth. So with, I know your school isn't an IB school per se, but with the independent projects at the diploma program, I've worked before with the Group 4 project when I was in Thailand to use. I was wondering, maybe Suji or yourself, has there been any like really like maybe longer term research that the iceberg can frame that produces like a paper and such so forth? So that's my first question. Yeah, and I have another one after that. So I'm just wondering how you mentioned the students are hungry to go deeper and the iceberg. So I'm wondering how deep the current practice is. Yeah.
Okay, so I appreciate the question. Yes, we're not an IB school, so our context is a little bit different. We do have service learning as kind of a curricularly based program. So a lot of what would be done in a CAS project, for example, in an IB school is brought into the classroom specifically. We have used the iceberg in analytical work, but to be fair, at the moment, we haven't gotten into really in-depth research-based things. Now, having said that, we do have an AP capstone program that lends itself to this, and a few kids have used the iceberg more as a contextualization kind of tool, if you like. And we have a new program that literally is in year 1 right now called Self-Directed Project, which is the equivalent, I think, of an IB kind of personal project. And so there, the kids are asked to really kind of delve into, usually the connection is to an SDG as a larger umbrella item, and then a specific issue that they're dealing with. And what we do is we ask the kids to kind of delve into that issue and use the service learning process to kind of go through it. So now that you're talking, Robert, I'm realizing that we haven't actually formalized the use of the iceberg. I have used it informally with a couple kids that I work with personally, but it lends itself actually for a pretty nice little leverage point there to put all the kids potentially through that, so that they can kind of frame, I guess, their research. And in the case of the self-directed project, we do ask that the final results are bigger than self, is kind of how we put it, which means if you want to write something, you need to publish it. And if you want to create new content for something, it needs to be seen external to the school, typically. But it's all new thinking for us. So that's all kind of a new direction. Sorry, go ahead. Did you want to ask your second question?
For sure. Yeah, second question is because there is so much emphasis on leverage points and solutions, I'm wondering if you guys have dabbled into introducing Danella Meadows' work on leverage points, because it actually, if you take her 12 leverage points, they are divided the same like the iceberg pretty much. I could show you, I pulled up a slide if you would allow me to share my screen just for a minute.
Should be fine, Robert.
Okay. So of course the iceberg here, it's not on presentation mode. It's right off of Google. I guess I can make it bigger. So yeah, so you have the iceberg here, right?
Robert, I think you froze.
Hopefully he'll unfreeze in just a second.
Perhaps.
Until he comes back, the research question came up. We had a teacher at the American School of Puerto Vallarta who used a book, and it was a book in Spanish, that it was a play actually, and she had her students use the iceberg to analyze the work and to go really deep into like the social constructs of Latin America. And it was such an impressive project. Like, her comment was, I have never seen these kids so engaged in anything. Like, she copied all these like random WhatsApp messages because it was done online, and the way the conversations that they were having and how deep they were going and how they were making all sorts of associations between the way people were treated in their own homes, maids, and with, you know, what they were looking at and reading about and that sort of thing. And so it brought it like really real. And she said that wasn't, you know, it wasn't for her, you know, analyze the book, that sort of thing, but they automatically made it all personal. Like they just, you know, identified in all these places and they could really use it. So I think it is an incredibly powerful tool for digging deeper, understanding better research.
Definitely. And with that, I'd like to highlight, we're almost at 45 minutes, which is what we capped this chat at for today. So I want to hand it back over to Natalie or Laurence for any wrapping up thoughts before I conclude everything today.
Natalie, you want to start?
Sure. Well, actually, I'd like to learn more about those 12-point leverage things. I thought that was interesting. And sorry,
I can follow up with Robert for you, who got kicked off.
Oh gosh, sorry. Well, yes, I think my final points might be, well, just a thank you, because just to go through the whole iceberg model again, and just to really explain it and to really have that conversation was really, really impactful for me. So I think I'm right now at the mental model in terms of where I am. But so thank you very much. And yes, hopefully that is now a tool that and I think you guys do realize, but you know how impactful that can be is really, really amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think I'll jump in as well. Like, for me, the best part of the iceberg, as with several of the tools with the Compass kind of repertoire, so to speak, is that really it's just so simple in so many ways, but the simplicity of it really allows the conversation to be contextualized in whatever way, you know, whoever's at the table contextualizes it. So this kind of plugs into what Nicole was just saying. And really a lot of times it does open those doors to, okay, let's really go a lot deeper than what our teacher would typically be expecting of. And so for me, that's really, really nice. Now, in my case, I don't have a classroom that I can use it in the class kind of consistently. I support teachers through kind of curricular connections and things like that. But I can certainly see this being used even multiple times in the same class, so that the kids can better understand not just the tool, but the whole thinking process behind the tool. So thank you very much for being here. Obviously, Gitanjali, thank you so much for putting all this together. I appreciate it. And I'm all for conversations, never-ending conversations, and I'm always happy to have any direction for moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie and Laurence, and all of you for being here. Before letting you go, I'd just like to share that next Saturday we have another chat with Mike Johnston, who's the assistant head of school at Frankfurt International School, and he's going to be continuing this theme of talking about student leadership towards a better world. So if you're free next week, we'd love to have you join us. And I think all of you have already done the level 1 online course, or you're in it now. But if you are interested or you know people who would like to do it, we have another cohort starting in April. So I will follow up with all of you through email to share about these opportunities. But more importantly, just thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Robert, maybe we can follow up through email with what you were trying to share if people are interested. Maybe that's
Yes,
something.
sorry. My internet is in Laos, so I think I overwhelmed it,
Well,
the router.
We're
Yeah.
happy to have you back as we conclude, and just thank you so much, everyone. Have a lovely day, and I hope we see you again at another chat soon.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.